So in our lessons on percentages so far, we have been looking at and understanding that a percentage is simply a special type of fraction. Today what we're going to move on to in this lesson is going to be able to find a percentage of an amount, and the ones that we're going to focus on are 50% and 25%, and what we will be using to do these calculations will be our knowledge of equivalent fractions, and we will also know how, or need to know how to find a fraction of. That was a skill that you learned when we were doing the fractions topic. So by the end of this lesson, I would like you to understand that 50% is the same thing as a half, 25% is the same thing as a quarter, and therefore we're able to find a 50% of an amount or 25% of an amount. And remember that most of or the reason we're doing all this work on percentages is it does have a practical application. You do need to use your thinking skills and your organisational skills. There are loads of jobs that use percentages, so there's just a few listed there, but a very important topic. Percentages are all around us in everyday life, so important that we do have some understanding of it. So if you look at this diagram here, we were looking at this sort of thing before. There are 100 squares in this grid, and if I said what fraction has been shaded red, hopefully you'll be able to tell me that it would be 50 boxes out of 100, so that would be your fraction. However, we also know that we can write 50 out of 100 means the same thing as 50%. So we'd say 50% of that grid has been shaded in red. But we know from our work on fractions that we can make 50%, 50 over 100 a simpler fraction. So how to do that? Well, we reduce it down. Hopefully you can see actually just by looking at the diagram that 50 out of 100 is the same thing as saying I've got half of that diagram shaded in red. So that would tell us that 50% is the same thing as a half. If you get 50% of something, you get a half of it. Another percentage that's sort of similar in this way, if I said what fraction, I should say, is shaded blue, then we would, what percentage is shaded blue, and we'll think about how we can make that simpler. So first of all, writing down what fraction has been shaded blue. If you were to count how many boxes there are there, so your fraction would be 25 out of 100, and your percentage would therefore be that 25 out of 100, that is the same thing as saying we've got 25% shaded. Now we can make this fraction simpler by dividing top and bottom of our fraction. Now if you spot that you've got a 5 and a 0 at the end of this, you might say, oh well, maybe I could divide by 5 into each of these numbers, and that would make it simpler. So 5 into 25 is 5, 5 into 100, or 5 into 10 first of all would be 2, and then 5 into the 0 would be 0. However, this fraction here can still be divided by 5 again. So what we end up with is 5 into 5 is 1, 5 into 20 is 1, and you get the fraction a quarter. But you may have been able to see that anyway from the diagram, that we can fill out on this grid that actually we could have split it up like that, so that we've got 25 boxes in each corner, and therefore our 25% is the same. So what we can write down is that 25% is the same as, yes, 25 out of 100, but it's also the same as a quarter. So we're going to use these two facts. What you've just learned is that 50%, if you've got 50% of something, it is the same thing as a half. And if you've got 25% of something, that is the same thing as saying you've got a quarter of that. Now, when we were working with fractions, if you have to work out a half of 10, for example, then what you're doing, a half of something, right? This is the same as dividing by 2. And if you're trying to work out a quarter of something, so if we're trying to do a quarter of 12, for example, that would be the same thing as dividing by 4. So our answer here, a half of £10, right, would of course be 5, and the quarter of 12, that would of course be 3. So the links that we're making with our fractions and what we're going to look at in a little minute with percentages, they're all interconnected. So here's a calculation, and I want you to copy these out into your jotter. We're going to be working with percentages of amounts, and we are doing this without the calculator. So if you are asked to work out 50% of an amount, in the first instance, I want you to say, write out the percentage calculation, and then I want you to say, well, that's just the same thing as doing a half of £124, because we've just learned that 50% is the same as a half. So I'm going to half that number, so that means I'm going to do an into, so 2 into £124. So 2 into 1 of course doesn't go, carry the 1 over, so 2 into 12, right, 2 times 6 makes 12, so that means I can make 6 groups there, and then 2 into 4 is of course 2. So what that tells me is a half of £124 will be £62. Now what that tells you is if there was a jacket or something that would normally cost £124 in the shop, if they had a sale that was saying 50% off, it means you're getting the jacket for half price, which would mean you would only pay £62. And our aim is to be able to go on and look at calculations like that later on. That's where we will lead to. This question here, so it's a wordy question. You've got that in a group of 130 people, 50% of the group have got blonde hair. How many people in the group have got blonde hair? So what you'd first of all write down is we're trying to work out, so there's our percentage, and it's 50% of this 130 people that we've got here, right? That's the three sort of pieces of information, if you like. So to work out how many people have got blonde hair, we need to work out what is 50% of the 130 people. Now we know that 50% is the same fraction as a half, so we are trying to do a half of 130. So that means I'm going to do 2 into 130. So I'm going to have 2 into 1, doesn't go, carry the 1 over, 2 into 13, so 2 times 6 makes 12, carry 1 over, 2 into 10 would be 5. So half of 130 would be 65. So how many people in the group have blonde hair? That would be 65 people in the group have blonde hair. And you would write out a little sentence if it was a little problem question that you were doing. So that question a wee bit different because you had to pick out the 50% of part of it and write it down. So in this example here, we're now at 25%. So we've seen that 25% is the same thing as a quarter. So what I would want to see is that you've written out the percentage of. On the next line, you're going to copy 1/4 of £52. Now, to find a quarter of something, we're going to be dividing by 4. So we're doing 4 into £52, and we're going to have 4 into 5 goes 1, remainder 1, 4 into 12 is 3. So that tells me that 25% of £52 is £13, and I can find that out by dividing by 4. Same thing with this one, I've got 25% of £411, so in the first instance I will replace the 25% with a quarter, so I am doing 1/4 of £411. So that means I need to be doing 4 into £411. So I have 4 into 4 goes 1, 4 into 1 doesn't go, carry the 1 over, 4 into 11, so 4 times 2 is 8, and what I need to do with that 3 that's left over is I need to then write my 411 with 0.00 because I need to be going into the pence. So the 3 gets carried down, the remainder 3 is down here at the 30. You're then doing 4 into 30, which is 4 sevens are 28. You're left with 2 over, and 4 into 20 would be 5. So here your answer would be £102.75. So when you're writing out these questions, working out percentage of, I want to see the working like this. You need to do the into bit to the side. So each line of working, you have the percentage, you replace the percentage with the fraction, you do the into bit at the side, and then you bring your answer back here. And that's what your working setting out should look like.